Hi, Patrick Ward here for Optimum Sports Performance, and today I'm going to show you a few techniques that I like to use for addressing anterior pelvic tilt problems. This is especially important, important for everybody, but especially important for golfers. And one of the things that we look at, especially in our TPI, our Titleist Performance Institute assessment, one of the first things that we look at is a pelvic tilt test. Those that are stuck in an anterior tilt and can't pelvically tilt both posterior and anterior, that usually will manifest itself in a variety of swing faults, things like reverse spine angle, exaggerated S-curve, as well as many other faults, and especially some of these faults coming from the fact that in that anterior tilted position, the hip flexors are very dominant. There's reciprocal inhibition of the glutes, so the glutes can't bring full function to the party, can't bring full function to the golf swing. So these two techniques I'm going to show you, they're kind of myofascial release techniques, I guess if you'd call them that. We typically do them dry, without lotion, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as I go. And these make the client an active participant in the treatment. So instead of them just lying there and getting worked on, it puts them in control. It puts them into the treatment. So they actually have to move and contribute and become a part of it. Okay, for this technique to address the anterior pelvic tilt, we've got our client prone on the table, and what we're going to do is we're going to work down the back. So I don't think there's a right or a wrong. I think one of the things that I believe it was Ida Rolf used to say is you work up the front and down the back when they're in this kind of posture, this anteriorly tilted position, because you want to push the fascia or guide the fascia to where it wants to go. So in the anteriorly rotated or anterior tilt position, the pelvis on the back side is actually higher than that on the front side, since the front side is tipping downward. So you'd be pushing the fascia or pushing the tissue downward because you're not trying to guide that pelvis to go in that direction on the back side here, downward. But I think you can do it either way. I don't think it's that big of a deal. So for this technique, I'm going to use the edge of my elbow, or not my elbow, but the edge of my forearm. I'm going to work down Keats's back, making sure that my elbow does not strike any of the spinous processes. As I work down, Keats is actively going to do anterior and posterior pelvic tilts. If the client has a hard time figuring out what this is, you can just grab their hips and let them feel as you kind of guide them, give them an idea. Usually, we do this technique dry, meaning that there's no lotion on the person's back. You can get away with this with some people. For others, their skin may be too tight, or there may be areas where it's very patchy and the skin temperature is different, cold and hot, or maybe a little moist. And that's going to create a lot of drag, and it's not going to feel very comfortable. So you would use a little bit of lotion. But in this case, we're going to go with some dry skin. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the edge of my forearm, and I'm going to hook into the tissue right here near the cervical thoracic region. And all I do, I start with my hand supinated, I hook into the tissue, and then I just pronate my hand a little bit. And that helps me kind of lock into Keats's fascia. What you want to make sure and do is you don't want to make sure that you don't go too hard. So I want to engage into the first resistance barrier that I feel. And when you're doing fascial work or you're doing work that has no lotion, you want to make sure that you work nice and slow. And Keats is just going to go ahead and go through anterior and posterior tilts as I work down the erectors of the back. And he works to feel what it feels like to take his pelvis through both anterior and posterior pelvic tilt positions, which is something that he had difficulty with, that we concluded during his TPI assessment. And I'm just working real slow, and I'm not pushing too hard. I'm just engaging the barrier, and I'm working down his spine, or erectors near the spine. Additionally, you can use the opposite hand as a guide on the spinous processes to ensure that the elbow does not strike them. Keats is going to keep going through that anterior posterior tilt until I get all the way to the end. Perfect. In technique number 2, Another way that you can address this, where you can get the shoulder and the lat a little more involved, is I'm going to have Keats' hand start right here next to his body. Now during this technique, I'm again going to start at the top and work down. And Keats is going to reach overhead with his hand. He's probably going to beat me to reaching overhead before I can finish his back, but that's okay, because I'm going to have him keep reaching and trying to reach and trying to apply some stretch to that tissue as I work down his back. So again, he's just going to start right here, hand close to the body, and he's slowly going to reach overhead as I work down his erectors. So go right there, and again I'm going to hook in with my hand supinated, and I'm going to pronate to get into the tissue. Keats, just go ahead and start reaching nice and slow as I work down. And again, we're not pushing too hard. Just engaging to the first barrier of resistance, working down the tissue, making sure not to strike the spinous process. So Keats has already reached his end range right as I get near the thoracolumbar fascia. And so he's just trying to put some more stretch on those lats. And I just work down until I reach the posterior part of this pelvis. So those are two techniques for addressing the fascia along the back in a person with anterior pelvic tilt. Hope you find them useful.